have to do. My name is Jana Mazurkiewicz-Mejsarosz, and I'm the founder of the Yiddish Arts and Academics Association of North America, based of all places in this surfer's town, San Diego. It's a big pleasure for us to welcome you, Marla, because first of all, thank you so much for agreeing to do this, to prepare this talk last minute. And second of all, thank you for agreeing to do a fundraiser out of it instead of charging us.
Oh, yes.
That's a big mitzvah. So we tried to find a nice local foundation we could encourage people to donate to. And we found this project, I don't even know how to pronounce it, UIMA? This is how you would pronounce it?
I think it's Ujima, but I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm a greenhorn one can tell. It's a nice local project because it's for parents or caregivers of African American kids. They can get adult education in the evening, and their kids get dinner and babysitting or some schooling. So I think the project is pretty cool. And if you consider donating to it instead of donating to us, that would be great. There are two ways to do it. You can either donate to us and then we send the check to them. And that way we know how much money we raised. Or you can, if you're more comfortable directly donating to them, that's also fine. And I can right now put the link to that foundation. So you would have this information. Okay. There you go. So we would be very grateful if you consider donating to them. Okay, and I would like to also thank all our media sponsors. We have quite a few this time. So we have two local organizations, Jewish Studies at the University of San Diego, and we have this awesome new organization, which Sarah can tell us about. Could you, maybe now it's a good time to talk and while I send links to people, okay?
All right.
So you can introduce yourself and the organization.
Okay, hi everyone. My name's Sarah. I'm with Jewish Action San Diego. So we are a nonpartisan political action and advocacy group. We started about a year ago. We're based in San Diego, per the name. And we started about a year ago and have really focused a lot on migrant justice related to given our location at the border, but justice in general. And so I'll just share a little bit about our our guiding principles and what we do and how you can get involved, just really briefly. So we are guided by our values of tikkun olam, healing the world, pikuah nefesh, saving a life, chesed, kindness, and b'tsello Elohim, fairness and equity, and really what these values look like in action. And so we welcome different, we see Judaism both as a religion and identity, and just welcome a diversity of perspective, and just as a way to really do social justice and action. And so I know with the murder of George Floyd by the police, that it has really awakened and reawakened some folks to act, and we just offer a space where you can through ongoing campaigns and sustained action and working in coalition with different groups on the ground. And so our next meeting is Sunday. We have monthly meetings. We also do kind of cultural events as well as ways to connect. And so our next meeting is Sunday at 10 a.m. Via Zoom. So if you're interested in being involved in our actions, please send us an email. I will put our email in the chat, or you can find us on Facebook and I'll put that in the chat as well to find out more information. Again, our work has primarily focused so far on migrant justice and the Free Them All campaign with migrants at the border in our detention facilities. However, we will be discussing this week how we want to show up for racial justice as well as a Jewish community. And so, yeah, thank you for having this. I'm excited for this event and happy to be co-sponsoring Media Live.
Thank you, Shkoyek Sarah.
Thank you.
You can please put your information in the chat so people would know how to get in touch with you, the locals. And we would like to also thank the Forwards and Jugendruf organizations for sponsoring. They are both based in New York City. Okay, I think I sent a bunch of links, so more people will be joining us. Sorry for this technical issue. It's really not our fault. Okay, so let me introduce the speaker in a few words. Dr. Merle Bachman is a published poet and a writer of creative nonfiction. And as I learned, she recently retired, right? From her role of being a professor of English. So mazel tov, that's exciting. So what is very relevant to today's talk is that in 2008, she published her book on literary criticism, Recovering Yiddishland, Threshold Moments in American Literature. So she was among the first scholars of Yiddish literature who noticed how the new immigrants to America, to Goldene Medine, were critical about racism in the country where they ended up. Right, so that's the short description, and maybe we could start the presentation.
Yes.
Oh, also, I should mention that your parents, right, they had a immigrant background as well.
My grandparents.
Oh, your grandparents.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'm second generation.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And they were Yiddish speakers, correct?
Yes, they were. My parents knew Yiddish in the good old way of let's speak a language the children can't understand. Heck of a way to pass on a culture. So I had to study it. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, okay. So you were not, yes, you were not granted access to Yiddish language automatically.
Correct. So anyway, thank you so much, Jana.
Thank you.
It's great to be here and discuss an aspect of Yiddish literature, Yiddish poetry, that few people are aware of. I mean, first of all, you have to be aware of Yiddish poetry, and that may be the case for many, some of the people that have joined us today, but not everyone. It is very wonderful and strange. So I'm starting off with the strangeness of translation, which is the title of the chapter in my Yiddishland book, where I discuss what I call Yiddish Black poetry. So today our focus is on a few examples of this poetry that really boldly imagines the experiences of Black Americans. And these are poems that can surprise, please, and sometimes embarrass and discomfit us as 21st century readers. And that is part of the strange translation, where Yiddish poets are translating what they have read, or in some cases witnessed, of Black people's lives in America into their own history and worldview to present to their own Yiddish-speaking communities. In a class I took once with the Yiddish scholar David Roskis, he said, every Yiddish poet in America has a poem about Black people, or words to that effect. And it's true, and they cut across literary movements and groupings. Poets as aesthetically diverse as Avram Rezen, Aaron Glantz Leales, Rosa Nevedovska, and Hay Levick wrote poems representing Black experience. And this is not to mention I.J. Schwartz's book of narrative poems on Jewish and Black life in the South called Kentucky, which Gertrude Dubrovsky translated, and I recommend you find it. It's fascinating. Anyways, I sought out some of these poems. I just kind of stumbled across them in my research, and then I began to seek them out. And this was, well, you know, a good while ago when I was writing my Yiddishland book. I became very curious about what they might mean in the largest sense, despite the different ways in which the poems function. I did come to believe they share a cultural work in that they reflect, and in some cases promote, the ambivalent process of Americanization in which the Yiddish writers, like all in their community, were embroiled. And to successfully become American was to be seen as white. So now if we could have the next slide. Thank you. So this is kind of a brief recap. The largest number of Yiddish speaking Ashkenazi, as we are called, Jews, came to the States from the 1890s through, well, 1924, there was the Johnson Act. Now it's almost 100 years ago. It was an act that's severely restricted immigration on the part of Eastern European Jews, and I believe immigrants from other unpopular parts of Europe, such as Southern Europe. So when, and I'll just say Yiddish immigrants, because Yiddish, the word Yiddish means Jewish, and it's used to refer to language and culture, but it means Jewish. So Yiddish immigrants came to this country with a history of diaspora and marginalization and of anti-Semitic violence. To them, America was the golden Medina, the golden land, in which there was a possibility, at last, of a high degree of social acceptance and economic success. And so they were, by and large, eager to assimilate, although they were also conflicted about assimilation and what that would mean for them. Anti-Semitism remained in this country, but Jews found themselves in a place where the binary was not Christians versus Jews, but was based on whiteness versus blackness, whites versus blacks. Yiddish immigrants, I'm just going to continue with a little bit of context here, and then we're going to go to the poems, and I'm going to really hope for discussion and look forward to that. But I just need to do a little bit of, you know, talking to kind of set things up for you. So Yiddish immigrants were not seen initially, nor did they see themselves initially as being white. They were not quite white. And they experienced a conflict between Jewish values, which, I mean, you know, the Lower East Side, where most of the Yiddish immigrants flooded into, was almost hegemonically socialist. I mean, they were very concerned about social justice. And, you know, they knew that they were not the primary other in this country. I mean, they became aware of this with time. And this stems from Jews' own history of persecution. So that's something that helped create that empathy. But the reality was that to adopt American values, mores, and pass into the only beneficial racial category meant positioning themselves over and against Black Americans. And for those interested in what it means that Jews and other groups such as Italians and even Irish people were not seen as white originally, I can recommend some excellent resources if you want to read about it when we're done. But it is, you know, as we have seen really stripped naked before us over the past few weeks, the foundational category in our country is race, and whiteness is the chief category. So I'm going to try and I want to kind of move around my gallery view because I'm not seeing anybody now and I want to see people. So hold on. Ah, there's everyone. Okay, good. Okay, so so can we go to the next slide, please? In der Fremd. Okay, I want to focus then on the question of the location of Yiddish immigrants in American society, because they had a moment of in-betweenness, this not quite white, never black, someplace other. And Fremd in Yiddish is defined as, it's an adjective defined as strange, another's, alien, exotic. And this slide shows some ways to define the prepositional phrase in der Fremd, being away from home in a strange place or foreign land, in the place of the other, neither home nor exile, but a space in which they could invent their own Yiddish relationship, Yiddish-Jewish relationship to America. So one important idea is that in coming to the US, Jews were not going into exile because they were already living in a spiritual and political exile. They were coming to the Golden Medina, but it was also a strange place. I mean, it was literally strange, and it was strange in many other ways. So probably one of the biggest features of Yiddish Black poems that you will notice is that they're infused with a paradoxical sense of intimacy and alienation, of holding Black people at a distance and at times examining them in a sense, but also feeling close to them from, you know, the Jewish sense of history, a history of suffering projected onto the Black suffering that they were very attentive to, sensitive to. And sometimes that, many times that sense of intimacy was not really earned from, you know, lived experience. It was just taking, you know, their own history and projecting it. So, okay. Let's go on to the final slide now. Thank you. Okay, so in my experience, Yiddish Black poems fall loosely into three categories, as this, you know, as I have on this slide. So narratives or poem sequences, poems in which the writer, you know, lyric poems as opposed to narrative poems in which the writer encounters the African American and expresses varying degrees of identification with and alienation from them. And then there are the poems that refer to or directly engage the lynchings of Black Americans. In each of these types, one finds the speakers of the poems reacting in some way to literally seeing Blackness, not just Black culture, but the people themselves, as possessing a skin color that probably 99% of Yiddish Americans had never before seen. And that is a weird aspect of many of the poems. And I neither want to judge it harshly or give it a pass. It's just what you will see, and we can talk about it. There's also varying degrees of exoticizing and or romanticization of African Americans, and at times of objectifying Black people, ironically, especially in the lynching poems, which were written out of a sense of tremendous horror and identification. And we will see that when we get there in a little while. But I want to, okay, so thank you. I'm done with these slides now. And if we could have the first poem. Great. Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you for doing that. That's awesome. It wasn't what I had sent as a scan. That's really helpful. Okay, so this is a poem that is is by Rosa Nevedovska, probably written soon after her arrival in the States, which was later than the bulk of Yiddish immigrants. I think it was 1928. She had, her husband had come here first, and so that was her way to be able to come in. I find this poem less problematic than the others we'll look at, and also emblematic of the poet's position in der Fremd. I also want to say, since the title is Negersche Kinderlich, that Yiddish writers used, in their poems, they would refer to Black people as Negroes, largely. Or sometimes the adjective Black was used, like as in schwarze Männer, Black men, schwarze Frauen, Black women. And generally, you do not see the word nigger, the N word, in Yiddish poetry. So, okay, I'm going to, how I'd like to do this is I will, and I'm really sorry that I don't have I don't have this in Yiddish letters, and for various reasons, but I wanted at least that you should have the transliteration so that you can follow along with me when I read the Yiddish. And maybe what we can do, I'll read the first two, since this goes on for, let's see, it's like 5 stanzas. I could read the first 2 stanzas in the transliteration in Yiddish, and then maybe I could ask someone to read the English, just to get more participation since I've been talking so much. So is there anybody who would volunteer, who would like to do that? Like, Annie, would you like to, I put you on the spot to read the first 2 stanzas after I finish the first 2 stanzas? My friend Annie in California. Is that okay?
Since you asked me so nicely, yes, I will happily do that for you.
Okay, thank you. All right, so Negersche Kinderlich, little Negro children. In die Augen, tropische Stern, sehr keppelig, schepsene wollen. Die tiefe Mysterie Chimären in sehr Gestalten ungequallen. Gufimlich von Bronze ausgegossen, kelchelig geklang von Bronzeletten, dunkelteuige, feuchtige Roses durchblicken wie Sammeten Glätten. First 2 stanzas.
In their eyes, tropical stars, their little heads, sheep's wool. Deep mystery chimeras have welled up in their form. Little bodies cast in bronze, the tinkle of bracelets, tiny voices, dark, moist, humid drops of dew through glances like velvet caresses.
Thank you. So I'll go on and read this last stanza, and then we could move the page up or over, whatever needs to happen. Fisselig poiken ois auf die Gassen New Yorker, die Rhythmen von Afrikas Plänen. Sere Seelis verschlafte, versorgte, mit bittere Tränen noch weinen. So we could, it's, oh, okay. So maybe, and if you could read this, and then Kaylee will move to the next page.
Got it. Little feet drum out on the New York streets, rhythms of Africa's plains. Their grandfathers, enslaved and burdened, still weep bitter tears.
Okay. Thank you. Ich guck in die tropische Augen, in gesünnigten, bronzebräunem Stern, die Gunnem auf mir ungeflogen, Afrikas Kohl tu ich herren. Die Stimmen von Nacht-Afrikaner, schwarze Schwatten im Gang durch die Gassen. Ich gehe vergaff, in mein Ahnen sehe ich Amerikas Völker in Rassen.
I look into their tropical eyes, into sun-filled bronze-brown stars. Melodies have darted out at me. Africa's voice do I hear. I do hear. The voices of African knights, Black tribes in passage through the streets. I go in amazement, In my mind's eye, I see America's folks and races.
Thank you. Okay, let's maybe if we could see the first page again, and then everyone could read just to themselves the English, and then, you know, come back to this page. So you get a strong sense of what the poem is saying, and then we can talk about it. And this is my translation. Are we ready to go to the next page? Yeah, okay. So I just want to point out before we dive in that there's several words in Yiddish where you'll hear the ech on the end of a noun instead of cup for head, it's kepelech. Instead of goof, it's gufenlech for bodies, fiselech instead of fees for feet. And that's a sign of endearment. That's the way a mother might speak to her children to you know, using the diminutive. It's a diminutive form. So there's a lot going on in this poem. Does anybody want to begin? And just, you know, unmute yourself. And I can't see everyone because maybe I can now. But.
I guess it's quite romanticized.
Yeah. Where do you see that?
Oh, the melodies are darting out, the voices of the nights. I go in amazement. I see America's folk races. It's almost like, you know, how sweet Dvorak's New World Symphony, you know, I hear these sounds of of Negroes, and I put them into my symphony called the New World. And it doesn't at all look at this other side
Mm-hmm.
going on at the same time. These nice woolly heads like sheep's wool, you know, tightly curled. It's almost as if you're touching them, those microaggressions that people call all of that. But it's a belief.
Yeah.
It doesn't at all get at any of it's very sweet. It's very kind. You would never know such as this.
You're right, right. And one thing I neglected to say earlier, during that early period of Yiddish immigration from the 1890s to the mid-20s, that was the height of lynchings in the South. But she's choosing to focus on children here. And she does, the images, some of them are very romantic. What are some of the, so thank you for that. What are some of the images that stand out? How do these children look to her in the first two stanzas? I mean, if you remember, because you don't have the page in front of you, but
They're like, yeah, they're like, cast in, like almost like you might cast an Oscar, out of bronze. This is very,
yeah.
um,
There's this kind of, I don't know if, I don't even really like the way I translated the line. Now I don't like it, the Tifa Mysteri Chimeren. But because I think it's a chimera. Is it pronounced chimera in English? I think
chimera,
so.
or
Chimera.
kind of, I'm not sure which
It's it's this. It can be kind of a monstrous thing, a chimera, but so she's got this kind of a little bit of a conflictual response there. But tropical stars is it's very pretty. Like Havka said, it's pretty, and then it's very sensual, because you can see, you can feel like you can touch, you can hear the tinkling of the bracelets, the dark, moist, humid drops of dew through their glances, like velvet caresses. It's very sensual, and as if, she has access to like touching and, stroking and whatever. But I mean, would you call it negative in the first two stanzas? Is it a negative portrayal?
No, it's very romanticized.
Yeah.
The image that stands out to me is little feet drum out on the New York streets.
Yeah.
The contrast of the drumming and the streets, but she's like placed them in a place that they've probably never lived themselves. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
I think she's very much romanticized. Like, she's taking these people who were ripped out of their homes, enslaved, and make it sound like they live this wonderful African life in the United States, where everything's just like, it's like they're on the plains in Africa. No, it's not like they're on the plains.
Right.
It's very romanticized, like they're living their best life in the United States when they were actually torn from there.
Right. Yeah. It lacks that awareness of, what came before. Absolutely. This period of time also was a time of the Great Migration. There were a lot of Black people moving up into the cities, and in the 20s, Harlem Renaissance and all of that. But yeah, it's a very romantic look. And then when we get to that stanza of the little feet drumming out on the streets, it does invoke stereotype, doesn't it? I mean, it's like the tribalism. So that's it kind of, twists a little bit. And there's a reference to their grandfathers enslaved. So we have that. And then when we get to the penultimate stanza, so we could go back to the second page now. Thank you. So it's the speaker of the poem who looks into their tropical eyes. So they don't look, we don't see them looking out. I mean, so at least she's not speaking for them in that way, but she looks into their eyes, and it's more, pretty images, sun-filled bronze brown stars, melodies, Africa's voice. It is very romantic. And then we kind of slip into that more cliche, stereotypical stuff with the last stanza, don't we? The voices of the African nights. I mean, what does that mean to a Yiddish immigrant? I don't know. Black tribes in passages through the streets. So it's kind of primitive. But the last two lines are pretty amazing. So, and especially that last line. And I like the relation made to Dvorak. But if this speaker is saying, in my mind's eye, I see, by looking at them, I see America's folks and races. Where does that put her?
Yeah, she's viewing it from up above. I mean, from out the outside.
From the outside. She's not
Yeah.
part of it. So it's that in-between space. She's, you know, she's not.
She probably sees America as either you're white Anglo-Saxon or you're black. I mean, that's, you know, and everybody else is in between.
I mean, that could be. I mean, and she's in between right now. So it's, at least that's how it seems to me, that it's, that her, it's a comment back on herself. And so, you know, she's kind of using this encounter to really reflect her own place. But I think it, you know, there's a warmth in the poem that is hard to deny. I mean, it's a sweet poem in you know, in it's naive, it's ignorant, and it's got a sweetness to it. The next poem we look at is going to be a little different. It's about another child. And I just want to get to that here in my own, okay. Yes, so let's see. How about, all right, so I'll read the transliteration. It's just the 3 stanzas. Karen, would you like to read the English? Karen Fisher?
Fisher Golton, that's me.
Fisher Golton,
sure.
okay, thank you. All right, so I'll start off with the, and it is a negro, so it uses the diminutive, but this is by Avram Reisen, who was a well-loved Yiddish writer, and in 1911 is the date for this poem. I believe that was the year he moved to the States, to New York. So here's his poem. A negro, a kleins, visage schwarz, hab ich gesehen sich spielen bei a Häus. Es hat getreuert und geschrocken sich mein Herz. Mein Gott, wie schwarz dein Beschäftignis sieht aus. Und plötzlich hat das Kind das Schwarze sich zerlacht, sich keuchlendig und spielendig auf der Erde. Mein Gott, was ist mit mir so eins, hab ich getracht. Wo hab ich ergens Asal lachen schon gehört? Ich hab der Monzig als mein Bruderl einmal, mein weiß Bruderl, wenn es ist gewesen klein, hat euch gelacht so. Es ist dasselbe Kohl, und gleich ist mir das Kind geworden lieb und schön. Okay.
A little Negro, a tiny one, as black as soot, that I saw playing by a house, saddened and terrified my heart. My God, how black your creature looks. And suddenly the black child burst out laughing, rolling and playing on the ground. My God, what's happening to me? I thought. Where have I heard such laughter before? I remembered that once my little brother, my little white brother when he was small, also laughed just like this in the same voice. And right away the child became beautiful and dear.
So take a second to just take that in. And it's another encounter. First encounter. It's like, oh, I've never seen a child who looks like this. Oh, and not just oh, but how saddened and terrified I feel. But what happens? He doesn't stay there, but he's very, you know, honest, and and something happens that brings out a different aspect.
I'm just, before we go there, I'm just going to say, but black as soot, like that's not really honest. That's so exaggerated. Like, soot is very black. So he's not honest. It's extreme. Yeah.
Well,
He's exposing himself, but it's a exaggerated.
Okay.
Yeah. So that line really struck me. Black as soot.
Right. Well, and also soot is not a very pretty thing to be compared to.
Exactly.
I think blackness can be very, you can see people who are very dark, but yeah, the soot is what he went for. So, and I just want to say, this is inside his Yiddish immigrant experience. I don't know how fluent in English he is at this time. I don't think he was, totally assimilated. And so he's not being impacted necessarily by white discourse in English. So this is I'm speculating this is his authentic response that's not mediated, but which is kind of okay. But I don't know. I mean, how much did he know at this point, or sense that, well, to be white is very important in this country, or to be seen as white? Because what happens next in that second stanza, and in my book, which I hope that you'll look at sometime, I spend a little time on that image of the child, rolling and playing on the ground. But, the child is acting like a child. Let's say that on one level. And then, my God, what's happening to me? Where have I heard such laughter before? So what's happening to me is a very curious question to ask himself, but he's heard the laughter before. So the child reminds him of what?
Well, his brother.
His brother, his little white brother. And that's what blows me away about this poem, because he didn't have to say white. It's his little white brother. So somehow, when he makes the connection between the child and his brother, then he's, his own brother laughed like this in the same voice. And right away, and I wish in my translation, even though the word isn't there, I had repeated the Negro child, because that's the child he's referring to in the last line, became beautiful and dear. It's not scary anymore. It's just a kid. He's like my brother, like my white brother. So to me, I don't know if I went overboard, but my response to this was consciously or unconsciously, likely unconscious, but who knows. This is like, saying, hey, but I'm white. By the way, let's not forget, my brother's white. That means I'm white. That means you who are reading this, Yiddish immigrants like me, you really are white, even if you're not seen as white. I mean, I don't know.
It's interesting that he says he's sad in the first stanza there. And I remember one of my first encounters in the Bronx, where I could see some Black children playing across the way. And my mother made some comment about, well, their mother doesn't wash them as often as I take care of you and wash you. And I'm thinking, this is a strange comment, but it's stuck in my mind. So I'm not sure how that exactly relates, except how sad. I said, why? Because you're different than me? What's the sad about?
Yeah.
Can we get it back on the screen? We're looking at Yehoyash now. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So it's interesting that he's describing that he's sad, terrified from what, but sad for why.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's
But he's sweet about it. He says, no, you're God's creation, you're God's beshefanish. I mean, so.
Right.
So,
well, yeah. I just wonder about even the use of the word bashefanish, which seems more like almost like a creature. Sheva, is that a creation, a creature? I mean,
it's something, yeah. V. Schwarzstein, your creation or your creature. But
yeah.
I don't agree with you. I think when he says your voice or the voice reminded me of my little white brother, I think he's trying to establish a kinship with this person. I don't think he's saying I'm white. I think he's saying, hey, look, this little kid he reminds me of my brother. So maybe it's not so different that I'm white and he's black. That's how I see it. And that would be kind of raisiny as well.
Right. More typical. That, and I think, yeah, you could make that reading. I think he is establishing a connection. I think he could have established it without saying the word white, because it's anybody reading this poem would know that, he's not African. I mean, he's Yiddish, he's Jew. So that's, I mean, I'm being very like, but
yeah. Can I say something about that?
Please.
Yeah, I just see a transition from an expressed shock in the first stanza about this creature that he's not come across before, and the effect of the black being the Schwarz is to contrast with what comes later through the transition when he recognizes his own brother in the laughing of this little child. And then he says, okay, it's the same as my little white brother. What the hell is the difference between the two?
That's how
yeah, and that's kind of what Sheva is saying too. And I think that's a fine reading of it. And it's a nicer reading that I make of it. But yeah, but it makes you think about stuff like that, to see that contrast and to see this poet draw it in very suddenly towards the end.
So were you saying that at this time, actually, Jews didn't see themselves as white necessarily, or whites didn't see them as white? Or
yeah. So it's odd also. Yeah. I mean, by that, it would be fascinating to do a very granular study, but because it's just a moment when everything's in flux, but the privilege of whiteness was not immediately granted, and it was something that really started to surface more after World War II. According to Karen Brodkin, I mean, that's one person to read on Jews and whiteness. And honestly, with Matthew Fry Jacobson, who writes not only about Jews, but any ethnic group having to get taken into the whiteness of America in order to really become American. I can't remember very minutely his argument, but he's really worth looking at too. It's very strange, unsettling, and clear that this is it's what the country is kind of, what this nation is kind of founded on in a way, but the racial distinction.
May I ask?
Yes.
Also, what do we think he means when he says "mein weiß Bruder," right? Because like weiß and schwarz in Eastern Europe, in Yiddish, means something very different, right?
Well, I don't know what weiß means actually.
Right? Does that mean just like kind of like a blonde, very fair child, right?
Yeah.
As opposed to a weißer or a schwarzer, right?
Yeah.
Who in America both would be considered white.
Yes.
But
yes.
So it's I'm not sure what he means by the weiß Bruder.
Well, that's a really good thing to point out, and I thank you for that. Certainly in Eastern Europe, I mean, there was the expression schwarz-gelevdik, right? I mean, someone who's, and that's literally black charming, somebody who's charmingly dark. And there are many Jews who are dark. But that's not how the poet is reacting to the blackness of the child. So yeah. But that's something I will think about, because that is, so I want to just check the time. So we've maybe another 20 minutes, half an hour. We have 2 more poems to look at. Let's check. I'll take the pulse after 1 more poem. Okay. Yeah. Sheva, were you going to say something?
The last line, I think I'm forcing this, but I like it.
Go ahead.
Gleich ist mir das Kind geworden, lieb und schön. So gleich could mean equal, and it could mean right away. And the syntax pleads for right away, but I think it's maybe both are there. And this child is now equal. Because he reminds me of my brother, and he's also lieb und schön, however you do that. So I think he's really arguing for the equality of these 2 colors, and you have to say what they are.
Yeah, I like that. I translated this like a long time ago, and it's not.
It would be hard to do that in English.
Nuanced. Yeah.
To do the gleich.
Well, but it is that nuance that's added in here for the Yiddish reader. Okay, let's before we go to the next poem, which is by Yehoash, and it's a poem about lynching. I wanted to give you a little more context. Yes, this is being recorded as far as I know. I can't keep up with the chat. I'm not good at that, but I saw that. Okay, so let's approach these lynching poems with some questions. For example, how do poems written by one minority group, one set of others, about another group handle the burden of representation? How do Yiddish poems convey white violence? How do empathy and impassioned ideals collide with objectification and stereotype? Now, I've already said Yiddish immigrants favored socialism, and the daily Yiddish press, in which poetry often appeared, was obsessive in its condemnation of racial injustice, as I understand, from my research. However, there's a Jewish American studies scholar, Hasia Diner, who's really worth reading too. She noted that in advocating for Black people, Yiddish newspapers in America, in advocating for Black people, Jews were also advocating for themselves because
I'm sorry, I think Sheva has a question, or it's just okay.
Oh, I don't know.
I see a raised hand.
Okay. I only see part of it.
Okay. Oh, okay. So I lower it. Okay, sounds good.
All right.
Okay.
James Weldon Johnson was a Black writer, civil rights activist, and leading figure in the Harlem Renaissance in the 1920s. And he put it, in fighting for our Black rights, Jews also fight for their own. I mean, it's inevitable. It's kind of coming from violence in Eastern Europe to the Golden State, the Golden Nation, the Golden Land, where they are shocked to discover that there's incredible violence against the other in this country. So Yiddish newspapers, according to Diner, were consumed with reporting on the details of American racism, in part as a measure of the failure of American society to, quote, live up to the expectations and dreams of the immigrants as well. Okay, and I mentioned before that approximately, really from the 1882 to 1930, an estimated 2,500 lynchings of Black people occurred in the US, predominantly, though not exclusively, in the South. Although the numbers of lynchings fell in the 1930s, they did not stop, and they still haven't stopped. Lynching was a key issue for the Yiddish newspapers, and they spared none of the bloody details. Hasia Diner comments that most articles dwelt on the actual murders, how they were committed, their reaction of the victims, and what the mob did with the body, which is kind of an interesting focus to have. Although I wanted to read something from the chapter in my book that Black bodies hanging were freighted with specific meanings. For immigrant Jews, pogrom violence was part of the cultural landscape they had grown up with and left behind to pursue freedom and safety in America. Hasia Diner notes that in July 1917, when a major race riot occurred in East St. Louis, it evoked this response from the conservative Yiddish newspaper, the Tagblatt. In the streets of an American city over which flies the flag of stars and stripes, the flag of the land of progress and humanity, a slaughter was organized on innocent people. They were murdered in the streets, shot, hanged, beaten, and killed. Abraham Kahan's socialist Vorwärts newspaper, the Forward, called it a regular pogrom on people who had the misfortune to be born with black skin. And that's, both quotes are for Diner. So when immigrant Jews observed violence against Blacks, they read it through their own history of persecution. So let's look at how two very different Yiddish poets dealt with lynching, what they did with the bodies of Black lynching victims in our last two poems. And maybe we'll read them in tandem and then just discuss them together. So the first one, if we could have that, Yehoyash. Great, okay. So I think for this, because of time, I'm just going to read the first part in Yiddish through the transliteration. And then I'll read the English. Vater von mein Seel, wo soll ich dich gefinnen? Verschwächer, guck an dein Werk. A schwarz Leib mit Blut bestreibt, a Panem Pech mit ausgekehrte Weißeln, a reuter Zung geschwollen zwischen schimmerdicke Zähnen. Vater von mein Seel, und Haar von alle Leiber, wo soll ich dich gefinnen? Father of my soul, where shall I find you? Desecrator, look at your work. A black body striped with blood, a tar face, the white of its eyes turned inside out, a red tongue swollen between glittering teeth. Father of my soul, Lord of all bodies, where shall I find you? Blasphemer. Can everyone see the whole poem, or do we have to move it? Move it up. Mm-hmm. Can we move it up so everyone can see? Thank you so much. Blasphemer, he who shivers in the blue weaving of your holy dusks, he who is fog. Whoops. I guess we're looking for the poem now. Okay. Yeah, that's it. Thank you. Okay. Blasphemer, he who shivers in the blue weaving of your holy dusks, he who is fog in your lament by night, in your song by day, he who squirms in the spawn of your unborn desires, he who calls to you, tears you, extols you, has become flesh, has become a black body with thick lips and smoke-curled hair, and you dug your nails in his rib, stabbed knives into his breast, him dying you spat at, him left swaying on a tree. Well, that's pretty strong. So take a second to look at that.
I think the Jews also had an experience with this personally in the Leo Frank case.
Yes, yes.
So where, and this is taking place between, I
This
think,
was
1912 or 1914 or so, and there's actually even photographs of him that are being taken and
Yeah.
circulated, sold as postcards, as memorabilia in the South. This is a very,
yeah.
And a Jewish writer writes, "Southern trees bear strange fruit" as well.
Right, right. Well, so the Leo Frank case was a Jewish factory owner in Atlanta or somewhere in Georgia.
Yeah, no, Atlanta.
Yeah,
They made pencils at a pencil factory.
A pencil factory, and I don't know, what he had been accused of something and was jailed, and then
raping a young girl, an employee.
Okay, so it's kind of the same story. The Yiddish, the lynching template. Yeah, the Yiddish template. The lynching template, where a white woman is supposedly raped, and then he got busted out of jail, right, and lynched.
Yeah.
So and what year was that?
1915.
1915. Okay, and this poem was written in 1919, which anyway, and there were plenty of lynchings.
The KKK started out as the Knights of Mary Fagan. That was the name of the woman, the girl who was killed, Mary Fagan. So that's how the KKK started, as the Knights of Mary Fagan.
So they began because of that episode in Atlanta. That was the roots of the KKK.
There was an earlier iteration of the KKK, but it didn't gain much traction, and it had kind of faded away by that point. But then after the Leo Frank case in 1915, it was reinvigorated as the Knights of Mary Fagan, which eventually became KKK. And then Mary Fagan's family still maintains that Leo Frank was guilty, even though the actual killer had a deathbed confession. They were like, nah, not real. So.
Okay, so.
Ask me anything about Leo Frank.
I sense someone has written a dissertation here. I'm not sure.
Yes,
Okay. Well, okay, right. So that goes into the stew, so to speak, of what makes lynching so vivid to these Yiddish writers. To look at this poem, which it almost, we have to ask who's speaking in the beginning. Father of my soul, where shall I find you? And then who says again, Father of my soul, Lord of all bodies. And I mean, I have my thought on that, but does anybody want to? Because this is what frames the poem. It's a complicated poem because someone is being quoted, and then there's the speaker who we don't know who the speaker is in the poem, says desecrator. So the speaker is responding to whoever says Father of my soul. Look at your work.
Is he somehow saying that?
So the desecrator who dares to pray to God has participated in this lynching. So the poem addresses him. But by addressing the lyncher, it reveals the lynchee. I mean, just what's your response to this kind of he's called a desecrator, he's called a blasphemer, and then the speaker refers to he who shivers in the blue weaving, he who squirms, he who calls to you. And that he has become, it's you know, it's a poem, right? So it's not, there's some kind of fuzziness, but he becomes flesh. So what kind of a gesture is that?
Can we see the second page again?
Yeah, thank you.
For me, it reminds me a bit of the Apatosha piece that some of us read yesterday, and definitely, actually, so in the context of the Raisin poem that we brought before, yes, it's a very different how to say, conceptualization of difference and of inequality, right? Because African Americans are Christian, white Americans are Christian, and yet, right, this, the difference of religion does not, or sameness of religion does not make for equality, right? So that's what I see here.
Right. Yeah. And the lynching victim becomes a Christ figure, doesn't he?
I would say so, yeah.
So you dug your nails in his ribs, stabbed knives.
Is he somehow, is he addressing God when he says, he who is fog in your lamenting night, he who he who calls you tears you? Is he addressing God, or is he addressing people who are doing the lynching?
In that section of the poem, when he says blasphemer and then he refers to he, it seems he's, I mean, why would God be squirming in the spawn of the lyncher's unborn desires? And why would God...
He's talking about the person who's being lynched. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's what I think. But the what's the cultural work of this poem? I mean, this is a poem in Yiddish, it wasn't translated back then. I mean, it was, it was within the Yiddish community. So what, I mean, it's like, look at your work, look at the poem's work, look at what this poem is doing. It's displaying this Black body in a way that's overwhelming, isn't it? I mean, it's... I don't know. I have an ambivalent response to it. I mean, it does the job. It shows us what has been done to this victim, but it also uses his body to make a statement.
I think some things leave you, some things might leave a person speechless, right? In terms of trying to put into words,
right,
what somebody's already put into words.
Right. So instead of trying to put something into words around what happened,
Well, I mean, I practice radiology for a living. And so I look at an image and somehow I have to put into words what an image conveys, what a picture is worth
Okay.
1,000 words, right?
Okay. Yeah.
So from this, you minimize it as soon as you try to. I mean, there's a visceral reaction that you have to this, and we all know what those. Well, many of us have maybe minor differences in what those visceral reactions are, but we kind of all come to the same conclusion, I think.
That it's shocking and horrible.
Yeah. Say in a few words.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. So it's as if he's offering a photograph of what he imagines has happened, and he's making it a little complicated by accusing the lyncher. It's like he's expressing his anger also at the perpetrator.
Yeah.
And it's calling out to God at the same time. I mean, it's like Eli, Eli, Shemi Gemer Olam, or something like that, but much more powerful than that.
Right. Yeah. Hokan, were you?
Yeah. Well, my first thought was the same as you mentioned, of, you know, it's being the lynchee, the person who's being lynched, as being a Christ figure. Mm-hmm. But I think in general, I mean, people are supposed to be made in the image of God. So I think it can also be taken as that, or maybe also that, you know, by killing and being, you know, so terrible to this person, this person is God. You know, you don't have to invoke Christ to do that. And that you are, you know, causing all this damage to God.
That's a great interpretation. I don't have much more to say about the poem. We could move on to the last poem, which is another lynching poem by Berish Weinstein. And I believe this was published in the 30s, in the mid 30s. So again, I'll read the first stanza and maybe a few, I don't know. Who would like to help me read the English? Kafka, would you read part of the English when I'm done with the first stanza in Yiddish?
Yep.
And Hokan, what about you? Would you read some of it as well in the English? Once I'm done with the Yiddish, the first part. Let's see what happens. Okay. Schwarze Kind, dich weiße wilde Hand mit der gefundenem Strick, und sie kreuzigt a Julibäum dein negerischen Hals. In sein schwerer Reifkeit, in dein voller Blim. Der Same Grünkeit von Blätter ist haftiger die Zweig, sie brecht nicht ab unter die Petlier. Der Sonn entgegen kleckt dein Hals mit Simanen von Tliens Finger. Blätter schlagen euch in Toi wie allemal und rühren sich lind wie allemal. Und sie fielen nicht, als das tresselt sie Wind von Gehangenem. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. The first stanza, Hafke.
Yeah. White wild hands snare you with a stray rope, and a July tree crucifies your new-grown neck. in its heavy ripeness, in its full bloom. In the thick of green leaves, the branch is more pliant. It does not break with the weight of a noose. Your neck with marks of the hangman's fingers, blots in the sun. Leaves break out in dew and sway gently as ever, and don't feel that they are shaken by the wing of a hanged man.
Thank you. And before we go on, this is not my translation. This is from American Yiddish Poetry and was translated by Barbara and Benjamin Harshoff. Okay, next stanza, Håkan.
You hang back in flayed clothes. Your drooping shame dies open and young. The extinguished lips sag thickly, and the dazzle of your strong teeth, a mute challenge to all eyes.
Keep going.
I can't.
Okay, all right. Everybody else?
Uh,
Stephen? Stephen, would you read?
Hakan couldn't carry on because it wasn't on the right page.
Oh, no. Oh.
Yeah, that
is
is
now.
Okay, it is now. You're singing prayer. Okay, go ahead.
Singing,
oh, I didn't.
You're singing
Whoever,
prayer.
yeah, okay.
You're singing prayer wept so mournfully to God, but he won't appear to you. His legs burst, his nailed hands. He cannot even open an eyes with a tear for you, or accept your last word as a confession. He's crucified himself.
Okay. Now, Stephen.
Negro, your body blossoms on a summer day, though you hang, though you no longer see the sun. Your wife making her evening bed on a back doorstep in a street, or your father counting pieces of suet in the morning on a meat wagon. Negro, the fate of destruction fell not only on you. Many, many die like you. Such a death is now in fashion. Like this, they now die everywhere, in Wedding, in Leopoldstadt, and in Carolina.
Thank you. Okay. There's some similarities to the Yehoash poem, but there's also some significant differences. And I'll just make a few comments, and then if people want to add in, because we're almost out of time. So, like, as in the earlier poem, we have the lynched Black man hanging from a tree as the all too human Christ figure. And, you know, and it's a very powerful poem. And yet here too, our gaze is fixed on the Black man's body, the mute challenge to all eyes, which is composed of parts, neck, thick lips, dazzling teeth, and that's, you know, the whole shiny white teeth is very stereotypical to me. And even Dishand, which Harshav is translated as the drooping shame, but refers to the penis, right? So you know, it's like I applaud this poet for writing about the lynching, and at the same time, I feel that he really grants himself an incredible intimacy to survey the dead man's body in this way. And I don't know, I had more to say about why he included the drooping shame, but ultimately the speaker in the poem backs away. He addresses the Negro, and then he kind of changes the subject in the last stanza. So what do you make of that? Because Wedding and Leopoldstadt, I don't know exactly where they are, but I'm assuming there are places in Europe where pogroms were carried out against Jews.
The Leopoldstadt is a reference to a museum in Vienna where there's a famous statue of a lynching.
Oh, I had no idea. From when was the statue put there?
I can look it up because I was curious myself, and because I just Googled it, and so it's called Lynching at the Vienna Criminal Museum, which is on Leopoldstrasse.
Oh my God.
Oh yeah, and Leopoldstadt is a district in Vienna, and then they have this weird museum of crime.
Whoa.
I think that's the one that you're referring to, right?
Must be, yes. It's on Leopoldstrasse.
It's a terrifying museum. They give examples of the worst crimes that happened in Vienna ever. So that must be the reference to it.
Yes, yes. And
So
wedding.
it must,
yeah, wedding?
Yeah, I don't know what the wedding is in this case, so to look this up.
It's a place, wedding, but I don't know where.
Well, fine, I'll figure it out.
I thought, well, gosh, I guess.
And it must be that this museum has been present for a long time in this place, because in the 30s, and it still exists in this place.
Yes.
So.
Yeah. Well, this
Wedding is part of Berlin. And it was like the center of communism, so there was a lot of violence against communists in Wedding in Berlin. That's what this, as far as I understand.
Okay. Okay. Well, this is great because I'm learning new things that I didn't know when I wrote about this poem, and the people who read my draft didn't know. but the point is that many die like you, lynched Negro. Such a death is now in fashion is a very kind of bitter statement, but it's weird to me. I mean, it's just weird after taking the time to detail the lynching victims, what's happened to this man. And then he mentions in the penultimate stanza, the wife and the father who are left behind, which humanizes him, but then he just kind of walks off. Well, this fate of destruction, it's not only you. So to me, it's an uncomfortable poem, but maybe he's making a connection that, Yiddish immigrants reading the poem, although this is the 30s, so they're somewhat more assimilated, a connection that they can relate to more. Well, look, it's happening, to probably Jewish communists in Berlin and so on, but.
Well, it was common, right, in that period to have this Christ figure saying that, oh, he's a Jew, that, so I think this poem, as other poems, correspond to that tradition.
Yeah.
They are not in vacuum, right?
Right, absolutely, yeah.
I don't know if Sheva has a question or it's an old hand.
I don't know if Sheva's there.
I always see hand by Sheva, so I'm not sure.
I wanted to comment on the transcript. There's a fairly bad misleading mistake on this page that we're looking at in the top stanza, the fourth line. He's crucified himself. That's not what it says in Yiddish. It's is allein gekreuzigt. So he himself has been crucified.
Wow.
It's very different. He is not crucifying himself.
Right.
Because that would make it sound like he's taking this upon himself willingly in order to show some kind of holiness, but that's not what it's saying.
Crucified himself. Right. Elaine, right. Okay. Wow. I just took it. It's the Harshavs. You know,
Yeah, no,
it's got to be right.
yeah, they're not always right.
That's right. That's, yeah, okay.
Yeah, but it could also be read as he's crucified himself, right?
He is
No.
crucified.
You know,
Crucified
Yeah.
himself.
Crucified himself, it would be hat sich allein gekreuzigt. But
Right.
the fact that it's not, it's is and then an adjective, it really, I don't think could be read that way.
Well, if he said
I think it could
he
be like in the
is,
sense of like he's
he
himself
is
crucified, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe it's the intonation with my, yeah. I did not read it as the English. I did not read as if it means that he himself crucified himself, but rather that he's useless.
Yeah.
You know, he's himself crucified.
It's
Himself
not,
has been crucified.
yeah, yeah. But I think, Sheva, you're right. It leaves it open to interpreting it wrongly. So it's, yeah. Well, I just wanted to, unless you have someone has something else to say about this poem.
I had a comment.
Yes,
I had a comment.
Yes, there are a few hands, so we can.
Yes, go ahead. Yeah.
I just the fifth stanza really, or I think it's the second to last stanza really stood out to me, because in the first four stanzas of this poem and really all the other poems, the poet is so focused on an individual figure and all these little details, they almost become like a museum piece. And then in this poem, I have the sense of being in a movie where you start to pan back, and then you go to his family, which, like you said, it humanizes him. He's part of a community, he's part of a family and a community. And then the last stanza, he's part of the world. So,
I like that.
Yeah,
I like
so that lead into it, makes me feel this connection to the whole.
Oh, that's
happening everywhere.
That's great. And I actually, when I wrote about it, I said the narrator, the speaker works, functions like a camera. I mean, we are following, but that instead of viewing the last stanza as it opens up to the world, like going through these stages, I said that he retreats from the body. But I like what you said. Yeah, that's really cool. Anybody else? Other hands? I can't see it.
There was Jordan. You had a comment or a
question? I was actually going to say kind of the same thing, but I was when you're talking about the widening of the lens back.
Okay. Yeah.
I couldn't hear that.
Could you say it again? Oh, he froze.
Yes.
Alas.
Yeah.
Jordan, do you want to finish what you were saying? Because you froze for a second.
Oh, sorry. I was saying, when you read a modern news article today, they start with the man who was murdered, and then a news article talks about their family, and then the rest of the world. So it reads to me like a modern news article today that you would read in a newspaper online. And not just this one, but the one before it too, about the lynching. It seems like these poems were used to also communicate what's happening to the outside world and raise awareness.
Right. To the Yiddish community, Yiddish speaking community. Yeah, that's great. Anyone else?
Only a thought.
I have a little.
Yes, Hafke?
That Yehoash is the famous writer who wrote the Yiddish translation of the Tanakh.
Right.
So it's interesting to see this additional side of him, because he translated many things. So I suspect he's bringing quite a sensibility of his thoughts about religion and God to his poem. And this is, one wonders.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. Yeah, and I don't really, maybe Sheva, can you tell us how much poetry Yehoash, poetry of his own, he published?
Oh, a lot.
Yeah.
Don't ask me for more details, but quite a lot.
Yeah.
And he did
yeah.
many things, including Japanese motifs. I mean, many things that were, you know, very far from biblical, shall we say.
Yeah.
So he had a huge range, actually.
Wow. Wow.
But it sounds like it could be a psalm or something. God who, I mean, I'm wondering, is this, you know, we should translate it back into Hebrew and find out if there's a prayer that begins that way. It sounds like there could be.
Yeah.
I don't know. How does it go? Gott von meine Neshama, what was it?
The first page.
Jehoash?
Vater von mein Zell.
Mein Zell. Okay, so Father of my soul.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like Avinu Sheva Shamayim, right? In Hebrew.
Right.
Our God, which art in heaven, or who art in heaven. I mean, it's the same kind of Lord's Prayer certification.
Yeah. Wow. All these echoes. Like, this is great.
Yeah. This is wonderful.
Okay.
Will we be able to get these poems if
we could send the PDF to everybody.
That's okay with Malka? That would be great.
I think so, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. I mean, I didn't I don't know if the original publication details are included on the PDF, but you know, you can always reach out to me and I can supply that. So, yeah.
I apologize for Googling myself. I mean, Googling as well.
Right.
But I found a reference in a poem by Weinstein, I think. And he has this line, pardon my Yiddish, get Zugenogtle Tieren streit die Nacht von Wedding mit a Yiddische Tochter. Through nailed shut doors, the wedding night screams with a Jewish girl.
That's from a different poem.
This is a different poem, 1933, I think. So that's maybe referring to Hitler.
What's the title of the poem?
I don't know. The first line is Die Hack killt und blutigt, die Hack räuscht und trifft.
I can't quite get that, but
it's quoted in a paper by Liati Mike High towards a poetic of eyewitness documentary expression in Jewish American poetry of the 1930s.
Oh, wow, that's really cool. I'll look for it. Maybe you can put in the chat box the name of the article.
Yeah, I can.
Okay.
And I put in the chat the whole presentation, so you can get it from there.
Oh.
It's right there.
Oh, okay.
It makes it easier, and if you can't see it for any reason, I can also email it to you.
Okay. Okay, so why don't we close? Thank you so much for this opportunity and for the great discussion. And yeah, I mean, just a reminder that the poems, I mean, especially in light of the poems about lynching, that they were written by Yiddish immigrants during a time when the writer's own whiteness was under construction. And, you know, they wanted to be white, they wanted to succeed, but man, those white people were really violent. You know, so it's, I mean, it was a really difficult time, strange position to be in. But anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. My apologies for these technical difficulties.
No problem. It worked out great. Thanks to
Right,
everybody
but I
for
get
coming.
suspicious, to be honest. Why only with this Black Lives Matter we
I
have
know.
issues? Because we've been doing Zooming, we do Zooming daily, right?
Yeah,
It's been
yeah,
from March on. And
yeah.
all with these two events, we had difficulties. I mean, with
Wow.
these three events, so with two with Mark and one with you. But we will keep
Wow.
doing it, hopefully. There will be more, and if you would like to join us for other readings, next Thursday we read about pogroms in Yiddish,
Yeah.
and there will be another Yiddish Leyenkreis with translation, so the reading circle about
Yeah.
Odessa
Okay.
with our
Nice.
Odessa experts. So there is a lot going on. Every day there is some programming. I can,
Yes.
yes, yes, you know this as well. And I can give you my email here so you can reach me if you want to get in touch and send me your comments, your feedback, complaints, anything you want. And then I can
Okay.
register you for the next events if you wish. Thank you again. It was a big pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you for bearing with all this mess at the beginning.
Oh, not at all. And how can I get to the chat once this page is gone?
Oh,
because I want to. Yeah.
I can send you the link to the recording, and there will be
and so we can
window
get
for
to the
chat.
Okay, great.
But I can also just copy it and paste it to your email.
Okay.
Let's see if it works before we leave. I can try.
Okay.
Because that's easier. That's easier this way.
Yeah.
Should be.
Okay.
I think everybody could just. Yes, the whole chat I just copy it and paste it to your email.
Okay. All right.
You get this.
Okay. Thank you.
You again.
Thanks so much. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Hokan. Thanks, Fran, for coming. Yes. Sheva already left. Okay. Thank you.
So if you Google vetting plots, you come upon a place, there were communists who lived there, but you come upon a cinema where a number of murders take place in the 1930s of communists.
Oh,
and this
wow.
is called Karl Liebknecht House.
Huh.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Wow.
So this is near Alexanderplatz and Rosa Luxemburg Platz in Berlin. It was purchased by the Communist Party in 1926, and there were murders that took place there that were well documented. Some of those people later became part of the Stasi in Eastern Germany. So there's a long history of what's going on. And one of them was a lynching, where somebody's lynching himself in a cell. So there's some connection. I mean, I just was quickly looking through this to see what, because I hadn't heard about this place called. So yes, there's a lot there that somebody knew about at the time, and that was reported.
Right.
Thank you so much.
Dark. Very dark.
Yes, of course.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you. Thank you.
Seid gesund.
Seid gesund. Bye.
Bye.